Hey everybody, I'm Jason Mefford and I'm with Brad Miller and we're walking a spiritual path again with you today. And in this episode, kind of like almost all of our episodes,
Pretty much every single one, yeah.
yeah, we get some kind of an inspiration that comes through of what we feel like we're supposed to talk about, but we don't really know what we're supposed to talk about exactly
Mhm.
until we get going and things start flowing and coming through. And so we're just trusting our intuition that the two of us are hearing what we need to hear and that you all that are listening are hearing exactly what you need to hear as what's coming through spirit and the universe. So today we want to talk about grief. And grief is an interesting word, right? Because the definition is deep sorrow especially caused by someone's death is one way, but informally it's also trouble or annoyance, right? Like I'm giving somebody grief.
My daughter gives me a lot of grief, yeah.
So, like I said, this can go a lot of different ways because I think at different points in our life, and maybe a little bit to some extent each day, we all probably experience some moments of grief if we are changing uh, and growing. Because in order to change and grow, we have to let go to let in. And sometimes it's harder to let go of certain things than we may realize. Or we think we're over it, but another layer of the onion gets peeled and we realize that no, we're not fully through it yet. And so I think there's a lot of things we can go on with this, Brad. Um,
Yeah, no, I well, I mean, again, we talked about wanting to kind of be transparent about how we come up with stuff like that. Um, so yeah, this is one of those episodes where we're like, all right, what do we need to talk about when we record? And we both kind of stare at each other and we're like, I don't know. I got nothing. Like, what about you? You got something? I don't know
I
about you.
got nothing. I got nothing.
Exactly. And kind of as I was sitting there, some things started to come to me. And in the past, before walking this path, or really even, a year or two ago, probably, for just a little bit further back on the path, I probably would have been all right saying, okay, Brad, you're being stupid. Like, uh, I don't, this doesn't make sense. Like, just, you're making stuff up. This is just your head. You're just being crazy, whatever. Just kind of move on, whatever. But one of the things, and I know we talked a little bit about this last episode, provided it goes in the order that it was recorded. One of the things that we talked about the last episode was about trusting in the things that we can't see, trusting in the stuff that goes beyond the five senses, trusting the intuition, that we may not understand it, we may not realize what's going on, but getting past the logic reasoning part of the brain and just letting things happen. So that's what I'm trying to lean into more of. And as I'm sitting here staring at Jason, the words grief came to mind. And I felt a little heaviness, I guess, kind of in the, not necessarily in my stomach, but kind of like resting on my stomach, on top of my stomach. And just kind of watching Jason's expressions as I'm explaining this stuff to him, I'm like, there's something there that Jason has to talk about related to this topic. Like, we need to talk about this for some reason and for Jason. I don't know why. So that's why we're kind of struggling here of like, where do we go? Where do we talk about? Because Jason doesn't know where it needs to go. And I'm just like, just kind of walking like blind through the dark here. Um, but Jason talked about two different kind of different definitions for what grief means. And I think the more pertinent one for us today is the idea of not loss necessarily, but leaving something behind.
Mhm.
Um, the fact, we've talked about as we go down the spiritual path that you need to release things to be able to open up space for the new. You need to release some of the old you, the old identity of who you were before to be able to open up to new things, to new ways of being. Because if you don't do that, you can't let those things in. There's just no room. It's taking the cup and trying to put in a full cup and trying to put more water in it. Like it's just going to splash out. It's not going to work. And so it's important to process that grief, to be able to sense when it comes and to be willing to work through it. When it comes to emotions, a lot of times it's really hard. We don't want to deal with them. We want to face them because it's hard. It's painful. But you've got to process. I mean, first of all, we're here on this planet to experience emotions. That's part of being a human. And so if you try to not feel those, you're going against what you're here for to do. Like you're missing out on things by doing that. But also repressing those causes them to build, and it causes them to start weighing down. You get all this ball of heaviness of all these emotions that need to be out, that need to be processed, worked through, and they just kind of get there and they won't get out. And at some point, they're going to come out. Like you can either do it the easy way or the hard way. Um, and I don't know about you, but I prefer to do things the easy way if I can. Like
Mhm.
I'd rather not get the 2x4 if I can just get the nice little nudge on the shoulder. Um, and so grief is one of those emotions I think that helps us process things, or maybe it's a sign that things need to be processed, that there's a transition going on, that we need to be shedding something, transmuting into something new, something different. Um, and the grief is there to say, hey, there's something that needs to be moved on, that you need to be working through. And I think we can listen to that and say, all right, what was it need that I've already worked through and let me get beyond that. Or we can try to ignore it and again get it built up. And like Jason mentioned that a lot of time I think there's things that we don't, or we think that we've gotten rid of, that we've gotten past, that we're like, I don't know why I'm feeling this because I'm done with that. Like that was done. Like I've moved on or whatever. But there's more layers behind it that we've not yet gotten to yet. Um, you get one more little bit layer of the onion and say, oh look, there's still onion there that needs to be dealt with. Um, and I know a lot of this sounds like more get on the therapist couch maybe than spiritual. You're thinking like, well, that's just dealing with emotions and processing grief, and how's how's that really spiritual stuff? But I mean, part of being human on this planet is to experience the fullness of what it means to be a human. That means all the good stuff, the joy, the happiness, the great things in life. It means the bad, the sad, the negative, the crying, the tears, the pain, all that, the suffering, all that stuff. Like we chose to be here so that we could experience these things. And so it's important to feel those things to be able to actually go through that stuff. But also, if you are trying to grow spiritually, and I'm assuming that those are you listening to this, that's one of the reasons why you're here, because you want to spiritually, you want to grow, you want to evolve spiritually. You can't do that if you still got all your crap hanging around. You got to push through some of it. You've got to clear out space, get rid of the stuff you don't need so that this new stuff can come in. It's like you're renovating a house. and I think you've used this example before,
Yeah.
that you've got to, you might have to tear up some floors, rip up a carpet, tear down some wallpaper, rip some stuff up before you can put in the new floor, before you can put new wall coverings and things like that on. Like you don't get the nice, beautiful house that you had envisioned until you get rid of the old stuff. Maybe the things that there's some rot going on there. Maybe some of the floorboards are warped and you need to get rid of them, replace them. Maybe there's some stains on the walls. You get rid of that old dingy paper so you can have a nice, clean, fresh wall when you're sitting there. So that's what I got. I don't know. I Again, I'm just talking here, so
No, and it kind of reminds me of the Teddy Roosevelt quote, that says, the two things that you don't ever want to see made is sausage and politics, right? And in some ways, maybe that's, kind of this podcast too. But again, it's not because we don't know what we're talking about. It's because we're trying to show you through our experiences, through what we've learned, and even in sometimes the clunkiness of how these podcasts get started as we're feeling into the intuition to give you an example of things you could try to do as well. And what's funny is even as it maybe seemed like rambling and it wasn't, Brad, that you were doing, because obviously what was coming through because your eyes were closed, you were trying to focus, you were trying to feel what was coming through. But especially as you were talking about um, the demolition,
mhm.
the things that you listed are exactly some of the things that I have done in the 3D in the last 2 months. Ripping up carpet, putting down new floor coverings, ripping wallpaper off, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Uh, so a little synchronistic, there as well. And I think it's, again, I'll give you some examples. Okay. Um, Sometimes I can be serious. A lot of times I'm serious. Jason needs to have more fun and lighten up, and I'm working on it.
Jason's a
Hey,
dull
I'm
boy.
I'm
Yeah.
working on it. I'm working on it, right? But the word, grief has the word sorrow, uh, deep sorrow in its definition, which is interesting because there have been times in my life where I have felt the grief and the sorrow. And, we all experience that at times in our life, and we can choose how long we want to sit in it or how short we want to sit in it, right? Because, sometimes we need a little bit more time to process before we can move on and let go. Sometimes we can do it pretty quick. I mean, again, I'm trying to do things the easy way. I'm trying to let go as quick as I can and move on. But the word sorrow has an interesting point to me as well because there's a story of that. So I meet a few times a year with a group of friends here in Sedona, and we rent a house together, and we spend kind of the weekend together and receive instruction and training and fellowship and catching up and all kinds of stuff, right, that we end up doing. And on one of the trips, out on the back patio are couch and some seats and stuff like that that have like the cushions on them, right?
Hmm.
And so, sometimes the weather is unpredictable here in Sedona, so it's actually snowed and or hailed off and on the last 3 days when 3 days ago it showed there was no precipitation. It just happens this way, okay? And especially in times like the monsoon weather where, sometimes it'll just kind of flash flood a little bit in the afternoons. So anyway, we were at this house and we, sometimes like to sit outside and sit on the cushions and talk. And it had it had rained, and so the cushions were wet. So we dried them out,
Mhm.
right? They seemed to all be dry. We put them back out, sat down. There were six of us. So we're all outside, six of us sitting down on these cushions that we'd all dried out. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, and I get up and my butt is soaking wet. Soaking wet. Okay. I got wet. Nobody else in the group did. I was the only one. And so, that was kind of interesting. And it happened twice on that particular weekend where it was just me who got my butt wet. And so, in trying to process it, and again, things are never quite what we think they are. And I was talking about it with somebody. And it's like, yeah, it's really kind of weird that this happened. And the person's like, well, what do you think is the message? And I said, I'm sitting in sorrow. And she says, yeah. How long are you going to sit there? And that related to a certain place in my life a few years ago where I knew I needed to move on. I needed to let go, but I wasn't sure. I wanted some confirmation. I wanted, for whatever reason, a secondary gain or whatever of sitting in that sorrow for longer than I needed to. And so it took that getting my butt wet twice uh, to do it. And the funny thing is that same experience has happened to me a few times where it's like uh, something gets knocked over in the car and it only gets my seat wet as I'm sitting there and my butt is wet. The other night, my dog, I'm sitting there watching TV, watching the football game, eating some snacks. And so I like to feed him as I'm doing it. And so he's, he comes up really close and to feed him, and he's slobbering the whole time because he's like, "Oh, this is so good, Daddy," sort of thing. And I only give him a little bit because I don't want to give him too much. And what happened? My butt got wet, right? Because I don't know how it happened. He normally doesn't slobber this much.
Let's see how you slobber on your butt. That's I'm just trying to.
No, he slobbered on the chair, right? And it's a leather chair, and it just went down and started
Okay,
soaking into and I got
gotcha.
up and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at how wet I am, right? It's again not normal for him to slobber that much for how wet I was.
Hmm.
So it's another reminder that when my butt gets wet, that I'm probably sitting in sorrow and it's time to get out. Now, what was I sitting in a few days ago? What am I sitting in maybe now? I don't consciously know. I know maybe some things because every time that we change, every time we try to go, start to go a different direction, every time maybe a relationship changes, work changes, we feel a calling to something else, whatever it may be, there's that sense of grief and sorrow and having to let go sometimes. And in the spiritual sense, it's a lot of it is our identity, our identity. And for a long time, I've been in the internal audit risk compliance space, coaching executives, training companies on that. And for a while, I know that there's some other topics I need to be talking more about. It's one of the reasons why, Brad suggested we do this, and we've been doing it now for 2 years, of there's other things that I need to start talking about and I need to start talking about more of. But sometimes it can be a little scary because I tend to just open my mouth and talk. And there's a part of me, Brad knows this.
So to our listeners, so it's
Yeah,
okay.
okay, there we go. Because there's a part of me that still likes to be kind of outlined and logical and got to make sure and hit these points. And so sometimes I'll sit and think about what I'm going to say for a while before I actually hit record and go. And so, one of the topics that I know I'm supposed to do more about that I'm working on is authenticity. Been working on the course on it. Was working on the sales page yesterday, some other things. And it's just, I know it's something I'm supposed to do, but it's been harder than I thought it was going to be. And maybe I feel a little heavy about that. Maybe I feel a little heavy because it's in a totally different space, right? And so I'll give you an example because, I tend to be very um, disciplined. I've worked for myself. I've worked at home for many, many years. And the only way you can do that is to be disciplined, right? Because if not, then you just never get to work. And so I kind of have a normal morning routine to get myself in and get going and I've kind of done a lot of the same things for several years, right? That's comfortable in doing that. And so this morning, one thing I do is live videos, and often they're live videos about internal audit because that's what I'm known for. That's what I've done for 30 years. Um, and so, kind of go about my routine as I'm supposed to. And it's like, okay, you need to record a live video today. Okay. So I start thinking about what? An internal audit topic. Why? Because that's what's comfortable. What should I be recording about? Authenticity, right? Because that's what one of the messages I'm supposed to be uh, talking more about. So, which one do you think I ended up recording, Brad?
Well, the worst part is I actually saw it pop up before
Ah,
we came on today to record these, but I didn't have enough time to listen to it
mhm.
before we started because I looked at my clock. It's like a 20-minute long live, and I didn't have that much time before we needed to jump on here, so I did not actually get a chance to listen to it. Um, but I feel like it was not internal audit because I would have immediately been like, nope, and clicked off that one. So,
It wasn't. It was You Are Not a Robot or AI.
or AI, there you go. Yep.
And so, again, it's like, there's a part of me that is probably still grieving a little bit because it's like, I don't want to completely give up what I've been doing, what I've been known for a long time. Anytime we change our identity, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I, I don't know if I shared with you or on here, but, you know, my Jamming with Jason podcast, I got up to almost 400 episodes. And all of a sudden, I just felt like you need to pause. You need to stop doing it. And so, consistently for 5, 6 years, I was putting out at least one episode a week on Jamming with Jason. Another podcast that I'd done for a long time, I felt that I was supposed to shut it down, wasn't as hard for me because I kind of knew that that was coming and I knew that I was supposed to do it. It just took me a little extra time, but it
Dragging the
wasn't a
feet on it.
surprise. It was dragging my feet. It wasn't a surprise. This was kind of a surprise. And why was it harder? Because it had my name. It was me. It was my identity as a podcaster. And so something like that, there's more grief and more sorrow around it of letting it go because it's like I'm letting go of myself in a way. Even though, again, logically, I understand that that's not what it is, right? This isn't even my real name. Everybody out here who's listening, right? Okay, it's my legal name as far as the government knows, but it's not really who I am or what my real name is, you know? But we tend to attach unknowingly to certain things like this. And in any time that we've attached to something, whether we realize it or not, when we have to let go, there's a period of grief and sorrow that goes along with it. And obviously, the longer we hold on, uh, the harder it is, you know, and sometimes we have to let go. And then we're in this limbo, we're in
Mhm.
this darkness for a little while because we have to figure out what our new routine is, right? For somebody like me, it's like, oh, you know, so first thing this morning when I got up, I knew I needed to keep working on this web page that I was working on last night. No, what did I want to do? Oh, go through the 5 or 6 administrative things in the morning to deal with other things, right? And when I went to record the video, what did I want to do? I wanted to default to an internal audit one,
Mhm.
right? But that's not what I should have been doing. It's not what I ended up doing. But sometimes there's some sorrow or loss that goes along with it because it's like, oh, that was kind of my routine. And I think when we feel the sorrow or the grief, it lets us know that maybe we weren't as unattached as we thought we were.
Mhm.
And so it's a way for us to, learn and grow as well, in realizing that, my intention is not to attach. But then again, it's like in relationships, for example, right? We're taught that you're supposed to attach. It's supposed to be like all consuming and whatever else, right? And so if it's not that, then there may be some grief or sorrow that goes along with that too, as we're trying to navigate, well, what does it look like then if it's something different? Or what does the non-attachment really mean, as we go through it? So yeah, I think, I do at times, even though I try to show up here chipper all the time. Sometimes I do feel some of the pressure and the heaviness because I'm human. I think we all do, right? And I sometimes share it, sometimes I don't, because if I shared every time that my body didn't feel right, or I felt a little heavy, or I felt in a funky mood, or whatever else, I feel like I'd just be complaining. And so a lot of times I just don't give it any attention, you know. But that doesn't mean I'm not experiencing it,
Mhm.
right? But sometimes maybe it's important for me to share that, like we're doing today. Other times, no matter how I feel, I need to show up and serve and, speak about the message that I'm supposed to speak about, no matter how I feel. So I don't know. Those are a few things that came to me, Brad.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, like I said, grief is not just about death of other people. Sometimes it can be about the death of ourselves
And parts of ourselves.
and parts of ourselves.
Hmm.
And I know you brought up the idea of the podcast and how you attached your identity was attached to that. Not that you intended that, obviously. I mean, that you didn't want like the podcast, but it happens. You've
It was my
for
name. It's my face.
400
It's like,
episodes. I mean, that was part of that was just what you did,
yeah.
right? I mean, it's no different than people who change professions. You hear about people who are like, "Oh, I'm a recovering attorney," or, I'm a former CPA or whatever it is when they were all of this for such a long time and then they stopped and they feel a sense of loss because there's a part of that their identity was around that being that type of a person. I'm an attorney, I'm a CPA, I'm a whatever. And I know people have had physical reactions when they've given up their licenses for some of these things.
Hmm.
They say, I gave up my CPA license because I'm no longer going to practice anymore, and they physically feel pain from that. Same thing with attorneys.
Mhm.
You know, the physical feel pain when they give up their law license and they say, you know what, I'm never going to be a lawyer again. Or when you get that, when you finally accept that you know what, that's not what I'm doing anymore. That's not who I am anymore. You know, 30 years as a internal audit stuff. You know, that's hard to say. You know, people are in the same boat. You know, how do I say I'm no longer doing internal audit? Or
Mhm. Yeah.
somebody who's done, you know, I
I'm
mean, that's
retiring, right? You know?
right. Well, not even just, I mean, but again, I think retiring even gives, to some extent, there's that point you mentioned about you kind of know it's coming. You see it's coming, you're getting kind of burnt out. And so your feelings about it change a bit. You're like, all right, it's coming. I've seen it, so I can start kind of preparing myself for it. But it's different when all of a sudden you're like, yesterday I was this, and now today I'm not. Maybe you know, I follow signs and I'm not. Or, you know, people who have lost their license involuntarily. You know, they go through, you know, the day after they're like empty because they don't know who they are anymore. Um, and that needs to be processed. That takes time. That's nothing that you can just kind of push under the rug and be like, oh, I'll be fine. No, you need to deal with it. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Well, because like you said, you have to transmute. You
yep.
have to transmute it, right? Transmute the sorrow, transmute the grief into something else. Um, maybe that's transmuting it into gratitude,
Mhm.
right? It's like with the podcast. It's like, well, I can sit here and I can, feel bad about it, or I can stop and say, wow, 400 episodes. Most people don't
That was
make
a
it past 10.
right. That was an accomplishment.
That's an accomplishment. Look at how consistent I was. And part of it I think too is because I know that there are certain people who would listen to those episodes every week. Not a lot, not thousands or millions of people each week,
There were some of
but
us though.
but yeah, there were people who looked forward to those episodes. And so in some ways I kind of felt almost like I was letting people down in a way, right? Which I don't like to do, but at the same point, it's like, but I didn't let him down because there's 400 episodes that are available that anybody can go back to and listen to at any time, right?
Hmm.
And I think, sometimes it's the loss of something like that, like I said, we attach more of our identity to than we realize. And again, I thought I'd learned that lesson a little bit before because I had a big issue with it when I was young because out of college, I started working for Arthur Anderson, and my identity was wrapped up in working for most respected, largest accounting firm in the world. I was on the partner track. I saw myself. I identified with becoming a partner at the firm. And so when everything got pulled out from underneath us, right, and all of a sudden we were seen as the pariah in the industry and couldn't be trusted, and some of the other firms didn't even want to hire us, and all the things that people were saying about the firm in the paper, it affected me personally. And I realized at that point I had attached way more of my identity to who I worked for than I realized.
Hmm.
And so, I've been more aware of that and thought that I am doing a better job.
And you
But
are,
there's,
don't,
I am,
but the,
I am. Give
yeah,
myself grace.
that's right.
But there's always layers in the onion. They keep kind of getting pulled back, and it's like, oh, I thought I had taken care of that. I guess I didn't. Okay, let me go fix that. Let me transmute that. Let me work on that.
Hmm.
Again, it's not like you have to go to therapy for 5 years to get rid of it. No, but you have to, often feel it,
Hmm.
release it, and replace it with something else.
Hmm.
And that can sometimes take only a few seconds. Sometimes it takes days, weeks, months, years. The time is really dependent on how long we want it to take.
It's all relative. Time is relative.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I, coming out of law school, in law school, I had this attached to the identity of being a law student and then be a lawyer. Like that was kind of the, I kind of felt, and again, now in hindsight, this maybe sounds kind of bad, but I felt kind of better because of the path that I was on and the things that I had accomplished and were going to be accomplishing. Um, and so for the first years out of law school, when I started to practice, I still had this identity that was very strong within me of being a lawyer. I had a little bit of being a business owner because I was a solo, so I had to have a business. I could run my practice, but it was still like I'm a lawyer, so you get the shirt, the tie, dressing up like a lawyer. And at some point, and this kind of goes to your point about the relative nature of time, that identity shrank to the point where now sometimes I don't even really, I don't remember is not the right word, but like that's not something that really comes to mind that I'm a lawyer. I help people with legal things. I have a law license. I still have clients that still, what pays the bills and things. But that's not really who I see myself as. Like I look in the mirror and say, "Oh, look, a lawyer." Um, and I don't know because it happened to me so quickly. I don't know when it happened, and I don't feel bad about it. I don't have any regrets or any negative things looking back and like, oh, I missed that. I no, I'm like, you know what? I'm better now than I was before. Um, but that's again, I think goes to the point that it just really varies from person to person. That some people it takes time, and it might be something like, you know, months, years to get to process something, to get past it. Others, it was very quick, and like I don't even realize until it was after on behind it on the other side of it. When I'm like, huh, I guess I don't really identify as a lawyer anymore. Hmm. There's other things that I put myself that I think of myself first before that. You know,
Yeah,
um,
and part of that's, in the understanding who you are, right? And decoupling what we do to make our money from who we actually are.
that's part of it. Yeah.
Even the different roles that we have as husband, father, wife, mother, whatever,
Hmm.
that's not who we are. Those are just roles that we're
Yeah.
playing. But I think it's interesting because sometimes it's letting go of who we are or parts of who we identify with, but sometimes it's even um, stepping into something that maybe we're a little afraid of or we don't necessarily consciously want to do.
Hmm.
And so I'll give you an example. Again, when you're an accounting major, you know, the, the main jobs when you graduate from college with an accounting degree is either you go work for a company in an accounting department or you work for an auditing firm or you work for a tax firm, right? And so I decided that I was going to go the public way, public accounting way, which was audit and tax. Hated tax. Oh, never going to do tax. Make fun of the tax people all the time, right? I'm never going to do that. Those get blah, 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 blah. So I did audit, and that's how I kind of got into that side of the profession. But then as I get older, some sorrow and grief maybe too, I've acquired certain skills uh, from a tax perspective. And when those things have come up of people, more and more people asking me for help, right? So when I sit here and say, let all those who need my help find me, right? Is one of my mantras, prayers, whatever you want to call it, because I want to serve and help people who need help. And so all of a sudden, people started approaching me about taxes. And I'm like, oh no, that's not who I
No,
no,
not
I
me.
don't do
Nope.
oh no, right? And so sometimes I think it's going the opposite way. It's stepping into a new role where we maybe feel some sorrow as well. And again, it's not like I'm going to go hang out my shingle and all I'm going to do is tax work. But there are specific individuals who have asked for and need my help, and I'm spending more of my time doing that. Something I never in a million years thought I would do,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes maybe there's even a little sorrow in that of, well, that's not quite what I had planned in my life. And I think that, this happens to a lot of us of why we either moving into something else or getting placed in certain situations in our life. A partner or a child dies, as an example. Hey, those people, that's not what they were hoping for or looking for, but that's just the situation they find themselves in. A relationship ends or changes significantly. Again, depends on which side of the relationship you were on, to whether you knew that was coming and whether you want that. And so again, there's parts of grief or sorrow that may come with it. You know, you
Mhm.
lose a job, you get fired, you get downsized, your company goes bankrupt. I mean, all different kinds of things. Sometimes that we choose, sometimes that we're expecting, other times it just hit us out of the blue. And
Mhm.
usually there's a period of grief or sorrow that goes along with that.
Mhm.
Um, you know, so I think it's interesting because sometimes it's a loss of things, but also sometimes I can see it even as a gaining of other things that we didn't necessarily anticipate.
I still think it's lost though, because I think in this case it's the loss. It's the idea that you had this plan that this is the way things are going to be. I'm never going to be a tax person. I look down on the tax people, and then all of a sudden you realize, well, guess what? Kind of lost that plan. That plan's changed now.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of looking back at like, this, I lost my job. My plan has been I was going to be at this company for 50, for 40 years, and I was going to get my gold watch, and I was going to, retire in the sunset, and then things changed. The company downsizes or whatever, and that the plans are no longer what you had envisioned. And so I think it's still that loss of the attachment of those plans that you had a vision in your head of what your life would be like. And now that vision is not going to come. And so
Mhm.
you have to grieve the loss of that and be willing to move on to new things that are ultimately in your better good and your higher good for you. They may not consciously be what you wanted, but again, on those higher levels, maybe it's what you need. There's
Yeah.
lessons to be learned. This is what you need to do, the path you need to take to get to where you need to be for the next stages, you know.
Well, and this is where, again, even consciously in the 3D, we think, I don't want to do this,
Hmm.
but it's all been planned out. And I mean, here's one of the little things, right? Is that our higher self is kind of controlling all this stuff. And so it's like I'm doing it to myself. So don't try to blame somebody else, when things like this happen, either too. And I have to remind myself of this too. It's like, as I've gone through certain experiences, I've started to say things like I remember I was talking to somebody about a life change just a little bit ago, and they kind of say, "Oh, wow, I'm kind of sorry that you're going through this." And it's like, well, you don't need to be sorry. I don't know why I'm doing this to myself, but there but there's some higher reason. It's like
Hmm.
my higher self kind of set myself up for this because it's something that I need to learn or something I need to go through, and that's okay.
Hmm.
I just have to keep remembering that, even when I want to, go, no.
Right. Clench onto it and hold on tight. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, well, I feel lighter now that we've had this conversation. So I think that there was things in here that we needed to say that came out. Um, Again, not knowing what it was that we needed. Yes, and there were few, if any, tears. To wet your pants this time. Um, but a lot of important stuff is in this episode. Um,
Yeah, and I think
so
it's just a reminder for me again, I don't need to sit in my sorrow.
mhm.
Uh, and instead transmute it, look forward to the challenges, get out of the routines, and just be lighter about it. Because I think, as we talked about in the last episode we recorded, this life is an illusion. The 3D is an illusion. Have fun with it instead, right? And start to remember
Mhm.
that. I mean, one of my spirit animals are hummingbirds, and even though it's snowing here, the hummingbirds were out with me on the porch, as cold as it is and snowing, reminding me of joy, right? Of having the joy, of being the joy, of living in joy. Um, that's a much better place to be than sorrow.
I think so.
Yeah. So,
Cool. All right. Well, with that, thank you guys for listening. Thanks for dealing with our ramblings. I think we got where we needed to get to eventually. It took us a little bit, but we got there. Um, so thank you for your patience with that. And whatever messages you need to get out of this today, they're there for you. Um, so with that, we'll wrap up for this week. Have a great rest of your week, and we will see you guys on the next episode.
all right. See you, everybody.